Hi, so I'm just finishing off my 5th week of social distancing here in the Netherlands, and I think everyone's going through something similar, whether that is a government mandated lockdown or some sort of self isolation. The world has been going through something very intense, to say the least, in the last few months. But what has made me happy and surprised is to see all of these movements going on about building communities and kind of this togetherness throughout social media, and also the importance placed on self-care and taking care of yourself at this point in time. However, I think that often the way that self-care is marketed, not only now, but just in general, in terms of well-being and wellness, is kind of just selling you a product that's going to lead to a desired outcome and going to make you feel better in some shape or form. And I think that particularly in like a time like the one that we're living in now, self-care should extend beyond that, and it should really be about honing into how we are feeling, how what's going on in our inner worlds, and kind of just delving more into that. And I think it's really important to acknowledge privilege amongst this. So I'm lucky enough to live in a home and to be able to walk outside, and I know that everyone's situation is very different. So I hope that these tips can be applicable just in different situations that you might find yourself in. So the first one that I want to be talking about is setting boundaries. And I think that that is so crucial to any sort of healthy relationship, whether it is with others or with yourself. And I think that everyone's been going through a weird transition, whether it is moving in back home or just spending a lot more time with your roommates or spending time by yourself if you live by yourself. And I think that these adjustments can be tough with just setting these boundaries as our private and work or study lives are all merging into one. And I think that firstly, it's just knowing your limits. So acknowledging how you feel in a particular situation. For example, for me, I know that if I listen to a lot of news, read a lot of things, and I'm constantly watching videos about this, either willingly or unwillingly, unconsciously, if I'm just scrolling and just everything is about Corona at the moment, of course, that I have this anxiety build up. And I know that for myself, what I try and do is just limit to watching the news or reading something once a day. And also in terms of the way that we live now with others. So I'm living with my mom now, and I think from week 1 we kind of set ground rules and just kind of respecting each other's space and privacy, and maybe also setting up an agenda like, hey, I have a meeting at this time, like if you could be quiet, or if I could have the living room to myself, if you don't have the luxury of having your own office. And also setting boundaries with your online life, because I know, at least for me, video calling and just online socializing has been booming. And I think it's also important to set limits there, because that can also become overwhelming. And since everybody's going through some sort of difficulty, that can also weigh in on us. And for example, if you want to be there for your friend, just kind of setting the limit to yourself, like, hey, I'm going to call this person and show that I'm there, but kind of limit it to half an hour, or just send a message because right now I can't give my energy to that person. Or saying like, hey, right now is not a good time. Can I call you back tomorrow? I would love to hear from you. And just kind of setting these barriers to protect yourself as well, and protect your feelings and your emotions. Or if it is with your roommates, it's just kind of like, hey, right now I need some privacy, I need some space, I need some time to myself, and that's more okay than okay. So it's just speaking about these things and acknowledging how you feel in particular situations. And my tip number 2 would be to practice activities that lead to a state of flow. And that's kind of a concept spoken a lot about in positive psychology. But what it means practically is kind of involving yourself in an activity where you are so present in that moment, in that activity, that you lose track of time, or you can detach yourself in some shape, way, or form from reality. And I think that's so important to be doing, specifically in this situation, because even if we don't notice it, we might just be scrolling through our phones, but it's this constant stimulation and constantly reading about whether it's cases or things that are going on, or checking in with your family. And I think it's just doing an activity that's somehow stimulating you, but it's forcing you to be so present in whatever that is. So for me, that's playing the piano. I'm lucky enough to have a piano here. Or I bought some watercolors and I kind of suck at painting, but it really helps me be in the zone and just forget about things for, even if it's just half an hour a day, to just be doing something else. If you don't have these things, it can also just be doing some sort of sport in your house, some sort of workout or some activity that you know that you can detach yourself from other things, even if it's just for some minutes. And tip number 3 is to practice a sort of self-check-in. So I like to do this daily self-check-in. For me, I like to do it in the mornings. For some reason, I've been waking up earlier, and I love to have a little bit of a morning chill moment with myself where I really hone in and say, okay, how am I feeling right now? How am I feeling today? What do I need from myself to help carry myself through this day in whatever I need or want to get done? Or what do I need from others? And whether that is asking something from your roommates or giving your friend a call and saying like, hey, I kind of need some support at this time, or can you talk later? Are you free? Or if it's a good thing, like, hey, I would love to share these things with you, and just kind of acknowledging how you feel in the present moment. Tip number 4 is to practice self-compassion. So I kind of want to be bringing in some things that I learned in positive psychology. So basically self-compassion, I think, is so applicable to the situation that we're in right now, because it can really be described as understanding yourself and being kind to yourself. And psychologist Kristen Neff describes it through 3 different anchors, which is self-kindness, also the sense of humanity, so feeling like you're not alone, but you're really part of a greater being, and thirdly, mindfulness, so being present and aware in the moment. And I think that self-compassion, well, it has been studied, and for myself, when I try and practice it, it really leads to like such an increased well-being, whether it is individual or communal. And I think it's the sense of community, as I was also saying before, and the sense of humanity, like we're all going through this in very different shapes of forms, and acknowledging that, but hey, it's okay to be feeling a little bit low right now, and there's a lot of other people out there that might also be feeling something similar. And there's 2 different exercises that I have been trying to implement and that I would suggest to try and implement of self-compassion. And the first one is a letter of self-compassion. So basically, one day if you're just feeling quite low, or you're being more negative to yourself, for example, writing this down in a letter to yourself and just going through the feelings of inadequacy or negative self-talk that you might be having. And then later on, rereading this letter and then trying to answer to that letter from the perspective of a close friend or a family member, and answering to yourself. And that can be such a powerful activity, or I found with myself, because you tend to be so empathetic when you're talking to your loved ones and saying, hey, don't be so hard on yourself, or you're being too negative, you should look at it from this lens, and just kind of being able to step out of that situation and speak to yourself with more compassion and answer yourself is such a beautiful and powerful exercise. And I think secondly is a bit more of an easier one to implement in your daily life, is when you are having these self-criticizing thoughts, for example, or you're being negative with yourself, for example, you can write it down in a journal and say in one sentence, I'm really feeling unproductive, or I haven't gotten anything done today. And that's your negative thought. And to that, next to it, you can write more of a self-compassionate thought. So saying, hey, you've had a really tough week. It's okay if you're not productive today. And to that self-compassionate thought, try and figure out a behavior. So, for example, saying, okay, work for 1 hour, put everything down, and after that, reward yourself. Or say, hey, today you're just not going to be productive. Don't worry about it. Tomorrow you will catch up with your deadline. Let's bake a cake, or let's call up your friend, and kind of attach a behavior to that thought in order for it to change and become more positive. And I think that these exercises on self-compassion are really kind of promoting this kind of understanding within ourselves that goes beyond the hey, okay, I'm going to show some love. No, it's really understanding this is how I feel right now, and I'm going to allow it, or this is how I want to act about it. And I think that can be really powerful. And the fifth and final tip that I want to share is something a little bit more light, which is simply to treat yourself. And don't be so hard on yourself. I know that a lot of people are speaking about just getting everything done in this quarantine and doing more things that you would normally, or making the most of your time, sticking to a rigid schedule or getting fit. And these are all positive things, but it can also become so overwhelming, and it can be so difficult at times to even be productive, because we are going through a global pandemic. It's fine to feel down. It's fine to be worried about your family members or your loved ones. And I think it's important to every once in a while just treat yourself, whether that is to doing some baking or ordering some food in if you have that possibility, or treating yourself to watching your favorite series and your favorite show, and just being and just sitting in that moment, taking it in. And I think truly just being with yourself and acknowledging that, and not just scrolling aimlessly and looking at what others are doing, or comparing yourself or beating yourself up for not doing enough, and just truly appreciating yourself for trying, for being there, and know that tomorrow it's going to be a new day. And I think that these are just some tips that have been working for me. I know that it's an up and down process. Everyone's dealing with it differently. Obviously, privilege is such an important factor in this situation. And again, I feel so lucky to be in the position that I am in. But if you can have a bit of self-compassion, have a little bit of self-care, and to those around you, because this, if anything, should teach us that what is affecting someone else indirectly is always going to affect you. And even someone else outside your immediate circle, someone so far away in a different socioeconomic strata, in a different situation to you. And it's important to kind of feel part of this communal sense of being, and to also acknowledge your own individual feelings. So I hope this helped. I hope everyone stays safe, and just take care of yourself.